Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal. We're ready for the third part of the Triggernometry interview with Dr. Calum Miller as he explains how he wound up firmly holding the position that abortion does no favor to mothers, much less the babies. So let's continue.
Let's talk about it brutally and honestly. What does an abortion actually involve? Because we use that word, so-and-so's had an abortion, or they're going to have an abortion. From a medical perspective, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, so it's unfortunately a little bit complicated because there are two broad kinds of abortion. There's medical abortion and surgical abortion.
I really object to the term medical abortion. Just say chemical. Medical implies healing. This is not healing.
In this country, most abortions are medical, but in the US, most are surgical, and it differs between country to country. Medical abortions generally involve two pills. The first of the pills kind of breaks down the lining of the womb so that it can no longer provide nutrients and oxygen to the baby. Sometimes this ends the baby's life in itself. Sometimes it requires the second pill to be taken, which causes a miscarriage and expels the baby.
Not a miscarriage.
Sometimes the baby survives even for a little bit outside of the womb, but then passes away, especially before viability.
If you could see the horrified looks on their faces.
At a late stage, these abortions, because the baby can survive outside of the womb, require a procedure technically called feticide, which you can guess what that means. What this basically involves is injecting potassium chloride into the heart of the baby.
In the U.S., they more commonly use digoxin. What they have in common is that they are both cardiac drugs. The potassium chloride is also used in executions in the United States when they do the execution by lethal injection.
So that the baby doesn't come out alive. And this has been, studied in an academic perspective. People who perform feticide are often traumatized by it. They've said that it involves stabbing the baby in the heart, and they've said it's horrific and it made them sick. But nevertheless, it is what has to be done in a late abortion to make sure the baby doesn't come out alive.
And again, that's a point to consider. Is abortion terminating a pregnancy, or is it killing a baby? And I think in these cases, if you're taking that extra step to kill the baby, clearly it is not about ending the pregnancy. It is about ending that baby's life.
Surgical abortions are quite different. So in the early stages, up to about 13 or 14 weeks, it's done by a vacuum. So essentially the baby is destroyed by the force of the vacuum and is taken out of the womb that way. And then later on, about 14 weeks onwards, a procedure called dilation and evacuation is needed, which is also known as dismemberment abortion, essentially because the baby is too big and too tough to be vacuumed, and it needs to be dismembered in order to be taken out. Sometimes if the skull is stuck on its way out, they will have to crush the skull in order to get it out. So again, I don't say any of this lightly, and I'm very sorry to have to say it on a show run by two comedians, because it's actually quite a harrowing procedure. But nevertheless, there are about 9,000 of those dismemberment abortions in the UK every year.
One of the things I wish that I could make abortion supporters listen to was an argument that Dr. Warren Hearn and Dr. Mildred Hansen had during a National Abortion Federation event. Hearn advocates that you remove the head, that there's a risk that you're going to grab part of the mother's body and you're going to pull her bowel out or something. So he advocates getting your forceps around what you figure is probably the head and giving a squeeze, and he calls it calvarium show. If the gray matter comes out through the cervix, the baby's brain, then you know that what you have is indeed the skull, the head, and you can pull it out. Dr. Hansen pointed out that of all tissues in the fetus, the brain is the one that's most likely, if it gets into the mother's bloodstream, to cause catastrophic bleeding problems, a disseminated intravascular coagulopathy, which can kill her pretty quickly. And she argues that you should get in with a suction cannula and empty the skull before you try to fish it out. And I think anybody who thinks these abortions are only destroying a clump of cells or some non-viable tissue or whatever needs to listen to that conversation. That's just my 2 cents.
on a baby that probably can feel pain, that is probably sentient, and so on. And the truth, I think, unfortunately, has to be said, and I see that as part of my duty as a doctor and as a human being.
I think what certainly realizing some of the things that are often involved in abortion changes a lot of people's minds. I think a lot of people's opinions are based on ignorance, like mine were, and still are to some extent, I think. But there are a few big things, and all of this discussion is just incredibly toxic, because you refer to your position as pro-life, and other people refer to their position as pro-choice, and both of these things are, they're propagandist terms, if you forgive me for saying it, right? That they just are. But let's explore some of the real ethical and medical underpinning issues that determine all of this. So
okay, so this is a cutoff point here, and a train is about to go by, so this is a good end point for me here.